All right. Thanks for coming, everybody, both of you. We'll make a start. So this is solving a 35-year-old problem. A little bit misleading because the company is actually celebrating its 40th anniversary this year. But technically the problem didn't arise until after the first 5 years. Who am I? I am the IT manager at Tasty Fresh. I know we were billed as Tasty Trucks, but we've done a rebranding in the last 6 months and we figured that the name Claris was taken, so we called ourselves Tasty Fresh instead. I started building databases back on Ataris. I don't know if anyone remembers what an Atari computer was. 32 kilobytes of RAM, upgraded to 64 kilobytes of RAM. And I've worked with FileMaker since the beginning of 2015, about March 2015, and came to my first DevCon the same year. I've spent 15 years working with databases in my professional life, and that's covered Progress, SQL, Microsoft Access, and now FileMaker. I live in Monbulk, which is a small town just outside of Melbourne, Australia. They're currently experiencing almost snow. It does actually snow in Australia, so I'm enjoying my time here at the moment. Married with 3 kids. I own one and I have 2 on lease. So that's the classic blended family. And I trained as an industrial chemist, so I had absolutely no IT training in my history. I was a lot cooler back then, and I've just put a photo in to show how cool I was. I'm also a very, very keen gardener. I'm just not very good at it. That was my hydroponics system. So session overview, what do we do? One of the most difficult parts of this presentation is going to be actually explaining what Tasty Fresh does, because it is a very, very unique business. I don't think there's another business like it in the world. I know everybody probably thinks their own business is quite unique, but I think when I describe it, you'll appreciate the breadth that it covers and the uniqueness. And because of that, we've actually pretty much written every single system that we use ourselves. So FileMaker is a perfect fit for the company. I'll describe the 35-year-old problem. Again, that's about half of the presentation. And what's most exciting is what FileMaker did that an actual bespoke app couldn't do after throwing a couple of years at it and a lot of money. Did it seriously save $500,000? No, it didn't. I've actually worked out it's a lot more than that. What happened after we solved the initial problem? So a lot of us tackle like what we think is the biggest problem and then discover that we can solve a whole lot of other things after that. And what other apps have we created? So a little bit of housekeeping. Just please ask any questions during the presentation because I know I'm going to use a whole bunch of jargon. If it doesn't make sense or I'm speaking the wrong language, just put your hand up and ask a question. A little bit of a translator as far as the jargon is concerned. I'm going to use the word run, round. It all basically means a route. So I'll explain that in a little bit more detail. And if I use the word pie, it's not an apple pie, it's a savoury, hot meat pie. There's a bit of a difference between cultures. And I don't know how to describe a sausage roll. Google it. It's kind of a British thing, but Australians love them. So what do? We're a lunch delivery service. So if you can imagine your typical food truck that's very popular in America, it's not that. So that vehicle will sit in 1 or 2 places during the day. They'll cook on the van or the truck, and you'll see lines of people waiting for 10 or 15 minutes. We deliver pre-prepared sandwiches, fresh rolls, wraps, hot pies, all made fresh daily. And it's basically delivered to locations around light industry, construction, and it arose out of a business that was, or a culture that was in the US back about 40 or 45 years ago, where exactly the same service operated. And the founder of Tasty Trucks, as it was back then, took that idea and applied it in Australia. And it's actually been that successful that I think it is the only business that does end-to-end in terms of the breadth of the business. It's the biggest in the world. And we'll go into a little bit more detail. So basically, Tasty Fresh will turn up to your place of work every day, same time. We are as reliable as clockwork, and that's where FileMaker actually will come into into play, as I described. And what makes us unique is that we have a very, very narrow retail window. We're not a store that opens for 12 hours or 24 hours. There's no online ordering. We actually produce to forecast, so we rely on accumulating a lot of point of sale data. So we have millions and millions and millions of records of transactions going back to 2000. Not that we use them all, but we have a lot of data that we use to actually forecast the next day or the next week's worth of product. So in fact, online ordering would be terrible for our manufacturing side of things because it would interfere with the forecasting. So it's the same route. So this presentation is all about using FileMaker Go and the Google mapping API and satellite imagery to actually assist us in filling the gap in the business, which was the 35-year-old problem. And one of the issues with the business is if we are driving the same route, if you and I were driving to the same place every day, it gets locked in your mind. What happens when you've got one van? One person needs to know that route, so if someone else doesn't turn up, they know that route. If you've got 5, you can get away with it. When you've got 140, you can't have 140 staff that all know those rounds. So the 35-year-old problem was that people don't turn up. And to give you a bit more of an impression of what the business is like, there's a little video. Hopefully the sound works because apparently that's been problematic today. Point of sale. That was my wife actually trying to give the impression of it. It's a little bit like Groundhog Day, particularly for our operators, because they do turn up to the same people each time. So it's the same jokes, it's the same greetings, it's the same conversations. And actually having the GoPro on her head made her day because that meant that she had to have different conversations. But it is like that. They become family, our customers become family. And in terms of integrating the app, we want to keep the service levels as they are every day, regardless of whether the regular person turns up or not. Again, this is a bit of an indication. This is a modified Toyota Hiace, and Toyota's done a wonderful thing just recently, and they've changed the complete shape. So you'll understand why that's going to be a problem in a second. What you see there is you have, again, the typical customer base, light industrial, tradies, a few office workers, but it's mostly that light to heavy industrial demographic. So selection of food, ice on the bottom. These vans have a gas oven in the back, which is the hot food. So we are driving around with a naked flame and a gas oven, keeping the food warm. Plus, in the other part of the vehicle, there's a refrigeration unit that keeps everything else below 5 degrees. And that's the oven. We literally take a $55,000 Toyota Hiace and cut it to pieces. So what is the 35-year-old problem? Hopefully I've managed to explain, it's a complicated business because we build the vehicles, we modify them, or we buy them, we modify them, we paint them, we put on the decals, we have to manage the fleet. We're also a logistics company because once we have the fleet, we drive them around all over the place. We are a manufacturing company and we're also in the food business, so we have all the constraints around health and safety as far as food is concerned. We're also a retailer and we still take 40% of our takings in cash, so we're also a bank. And we also run franchises. So you can imagine, is there a piece of software that you can get off the shelf that will do all that? And FileMaker I didn't even start there as far as FileMaker is concerned. So this slide has got a whole lot of numbers. 45 to 60, that is the discrete locations that we'll have with each round, or run, or route. We have 139 vans. As of last week, it was 140. We have 6,604 unique locations, and we have 13,208 individual GPS coordinates. So we're storing a lot of locations for a business that's turning over $50 million. And approximately 30,000 individual customers. And hopefully that video gave you a bit of an impression of sort of time pressure they're under. We basically will be at a customer location for about 1 minute to 2 minutes. We'll serve between 2 and 30 people. Sometimes it's up to 100 people. The longest we'd stay in a position would be 10 minutes, and often each location is only a 3 or 4 minute drive away. So to this business, 10 seconds means a lot. So if you don't know the route, the 5 minutes it takes you to find where you're going actually means that by the end of the day, across 40 or 50 stops, you could be an hour behind or worse. And we also run very small relief teams, so 2 or 3 per site, so that's a ratio of about 1 to 10. So the 35-year-old problem is staff don't turn up. Relief operators will take 3 to 4 days to learn a route. You can imagine 60 places, you've got so many different ways that you can drive that route. Even if they know the route, one of the things that's a challenge in the business is that it's the same every day. Nothing changes until it does. A customer might want you to park in a different location, there might be traffic changes or roadworks, which means small things change, construction in an area, which means you can't go down a certain path. And over time, those small changes can become big issues if you actually have to turn up one morning and drive a route that you're not familiar with. And with growth, that's become even greater in terms of a challenge because we've now got 5 different physical locations we operate out of. When I started 7 years ago, it was 2. And to grow the business like that, we've had to take a lot of people with the experience and place them in other states and move them around. So all of a sudden, the knowledge base dropped like dramatically. And if someone turns up and they don't know a route and they get put on that route and they have to go and drive it with that sort of time pressure, they are pretty much left on their own. There's no one to help them and they are self-sufficient, but they are often left just going, where the hell am I? And that was it, like the old street directory. Anyone remember maps? So the CEO, who's still with the business and still the founder and CEO is still with the business, has a firm belief in continuous improvement. And I'm lucky from a couple of aspects. I have a CEO who is extremely supportive, very tech savvy, and always wants things to be better. And wants every problem solved, so perfect solution. So he said, I want an app so that any operator can just turn up and drive the route. So we actually engaged a couple of developers, Android, iOS. We spent 2 years and $30,000 and it still didn't work. We had issues with updates. Every time iOS changed, we had to go back to the developer, get them to recompile it, trying to distribute it to a whole bunch of phones without actually having MDM back there. No mobile device management back in that time. I don't think I discovered it. And we also had this issue with this maintaining accuracy of the GPS coordinates. when we first started down this path of actually creating a database of customers and locations, we used geocoding. So that's using the Google API, we'd push an address to it, and we'd get a GPS location. And more often than not, the pin would be over the top of the building. And when you're working in industrial estates, often the place you want to be is not the middle of the building, particularly if you're driving. So it would always try and navigate you to the nearest road. And sometimes that road was on the other side of a fence. So you're back down you're late by 5 or 10 minutes. So keeping it accurate was another huge challenge. And FileMaker was able to solve that problem as well. So this is why we called her Midget. In fact, she calls herself Midget, so we're not being politically incorrect. And that is Colin. And Belinda is actually, she was the one who wore the GoPro, and she's one of our franchisees as well. So I literally, on Friday, discovered FileMaker, realised that it could work with mobile phones, which I thought I could put in somebody's pocket. So my learning path with FileMaker was basically from zero to mobile overnight. At the same time, I had to figure out how to do server-side processing to import SQL data, because our entire database and back office system runs on SQL. And once the data was actually on the phone, I was in the process of developing a customer relationship management, because like we all need, a customer relationship management system. And I thought, actually, I've got my existing customer data there. I've got GPS coordinates as well. I wonder if I can use it to actually navigate. Quick Google, found somebody else who had opened the Google Maps and the Apple Maps app on the phone. So I stole their code. And by Monday, I literally walked in with a FileMaker Go app that had replaced the dedicated app that we had spent $30,000 on. It was working in FileMaker, and it was better than what we had already spent all that time on. Not only that, when the CEO said he wanted to change the colour, I literally changed it in front of his eyes. So I actually put that out as a beta test. I gave it to one of our managers, and I think the next day, she suddenly had like 5 people call in sick. So we sent somebody from the other side of the city who didn't even know how to get to the other depot. She handed her the phone and said, try this is new, see if it helps. And someone who was completely unfamiliar with it, didn't even know how to get to the depot to start with, was able to drive the entire route, and they were 20 minutes late by the end of the day, but actually managed to get the entire round done. And that has happened, that situation has repeated itself more and more frequently. So that was not what it looked like the first time. So that has come about after figuring out and actually using this myself. That's the other beauty of working in this business. Not only are you never 100 metres away from food, you also get to go and use your own apps. So I have actually been out in the van in a situation where they had nobody to drive a route, and I was using it to assist with navigation. Generally, you go out on your own with it, but they don't trust me and your customers. And as we were using it, we realised that a visualisation of where we're actually turning up was really important. And we also still had that challenge of it taking you possibly to the other side of the fence. So what we realised is we need to get GPS coordinates of the driveways, because that's the nearest point to the road. And in some cases, even you do it 50 metres up the road, because anyone familiar with how Google sometimes sends you in the wrong direction? Particularly in remote areas or areas of poor reception, you can end up in a completely wrong area. So we also realised that sometimes we park 100 metres, 200 metres away from where we actually enter. So we realised we needed 2 coordinates. So how do you collect 13,000 very, very bespoke coordinates? We use track sticks. Anyone familiar with track sticks? They're what you use when you're tracking your spouse and trying to find out whether they're cheating on you. You're magnetic, you stick them on the car, then you pull them off at the end of the day, you plug them into your PC, you download all the coordinates. Spent all this time not tracking my wife, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours, 7 hours, 8 hours, 9 hours, 10 hours, 11 hours, 12 hours, 13 hours, 14 hours, 15 hours, 16 hours, 17 hours, 18 hours, 19 hours, 20 hours, 21 hours, 22 hours, 23 hours, 24 hours, 25 hours, 26 hours, 27 hours, 28 hours, 29 hours, 30 hours, 31 hours, 32 hours, 33 hours, 34 hours, 35 hours, 36 hours, 37 hours, 38 hours, 39 hours, 40 hours, 41 hours, 42 hours, 43 hours, 44 hours, 45 hours, 46 hours, 47 hours, 48 hours, 49 hours, 50 hours, 51 hours, 52 hours, 53 hours, 54 hours, 55 hours, 56 hours, 57 hours, 58 hours, 59 hours, 60 hours, 61 hours trying to line up our serve times with the coordinates. That was a nightmare because it would pick up that you'd stopped at the traffic lights and it assumed that you were stopped for 2 minutes, so that must have been a stop. So the alignment in that process was just terrible. And you might not be familiar with the phrase, but we have a phrase in Australia called, it's like painting the Sydney Harbour Bridge. By the time you've finished it, you've got to go back to the beginning and start it again. And again, over a period of a year, we realised that we just could not maintain the database, because customers would change and people wouldn't change the coordinates, we'd change where we parked. So the key to solving that problem was I discovered JavaScript. I didn't even know it was JavaScript. I've gone to a couple of sessions now, I know what JavaScript is. But again, I found somebody who had, it's a part of probably the Google ecosystem, where I found placement of multiple markers, code to how to do that. And then I discovered that you could do things like events, and then you could call FileMaker scripts by the time at a particular event in the JavaScript. So there'll be a little video coming up that actually shows how we solved this particular problem, which was JavaScript listeners and events of where a pin was dragged and became stationary. And what we actually did was put iPads in the hands of every single operator who ran that route every day, because they know that whole route intimately. So they literally just dragged the pins to where they were meant to be, and we had 13,000 GPS coordinates mapped within a month. So now that's something they do every week. Every week they run through their run and they make sure that all the positions are correct. We've added probably a little bit more than that since then. The next thing we found was that, as an example, on the right, Google Earth updates its aerial imagery or satellite imagery once every 3 years. I don't know what it's like in the US, but in Australia it's like 3 years sometimes. And if you're working in construction, sometimes you're looking at cows, not roads. So we discovered an emerging technology that's actually Australian-based called Nearmap, and they do aerial photography, and they will fly over the metropolitan areas of Australia, and they're now in the US. They'll do that every 3 months. So on the left-hand side, you'll see the equivalent aerial imagery versus Google Earth. And that is actually our new site in Perth. So I was able to find, I knew a construction site that was going to be up to date. So left-hand side there is exactly what it looks like, probably what it looked like about 2 months ago. And we get the grass and everything from Google Earth. And that is actually our depot. So the resolution, again, is also fantastic. And there have been times where we've actually looked on our app at where we're meant to be parking, and we've seen an image of our van sitting there. So the plane has actually flown over at the time we've served. So to give you an idea of what it looks like now, and I've got to say it's totally different. The first version was a lot like my hydroponics. It was ugly. There was lots of button pushing and user intervention. Whereas now it's single click. I've tried to adopt the methodology. If you know that's where the client is going to go in the app, preempt it and head there in advance. So this is Navi, mate. I've named it. And again, in summary, it holds all of our location data for all of our positions, 13,000 coordinates, and there is no audio. So in this case, they're selecting the depot, they're finding the route number, the run number. There's some additional information like what suburb it is, so if anybody needs to actually leave the depot in a rush, they know roughly where they're going. You can see the customised pins there. And you can see that you can actually move those pins, and what that is doing now is calling a FileMaker script, which is sending the data off to the SQL database. And this app actually, it was always hosted until we went into an area where there was no 3G reception. And I got to tell you, the poor guy that was driving the van on the day, that's now called the Google Maps app on the phone. We were in an area of really poor reception. So the whole app went offline. So I think last DevCon, I realised we could use the data API, so I went back, rewrote it. So it's completely separated from the server now, so it pulls all that data in via the data API. And what was probably not 100% clear there was that we have now also reached the point where we're looking for that last few seconds. And if you turn up to a really large industrial site, sometimes your entrance and your parking position are 300 or 400 metres away, or it's behind the building. So if you've never been there before, you don't know where you've got to go. So we've now incorporated more JavaScript where you can actually tap the image and draw lines. So you've almost got a breadcrumb trail to your final destination. And I thought, they're never going to use this. I think I spent one afternoon on a Saturday putting that all together. They'll never use it. They tell me they only need it in one or two circumstances. They've already done 120 sites where they've drawn the individual lines onto the map. I need to finish this off. We're almost there. So we integrated a lot of other technology, drawing the detailed path, recording the coordinates. There was a session again at DevCon. I just keep stealing stuff from everybody. It's the best way. Salvatore talked about how to use Amazon Poly. So we have a lot of text notes that people have typed in over the years. So I utilise a geosensor so that when they're within 100 metres of the final destination, it actually takes that text, calls the Amazon Poly API, converts it to an MP3, and then speaks it to the operator as they're driving in, so they don't have to look back at their phone. I don't know if you have the laws here, but you can't touch the phone, you can't, while you're driving, probably a good idea. So we're trying to disconnect the user from the phone so that more and more of it is just automated. One final one, which I just got working about 3 weeks ago, was we have a customer application as well on Android and iOS. And we operate an Android point of sale system that initiates a notification to our customers to let them know when we're coming. So we have a whole, probably 5,000 or 6,000 so far. We're only about halfway through the fleet. Customers subscribe to our customer application and notification. Again, flaky 4G, devices that suddenly lose connection to the internet. So sometimes the notifications don't go out or can't go out. So I've now integrated into Navi the list of the customer applications, all their IDs, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with Firebase, the Google Firebase notification service. FileMaker will now call that, and this is a demonstration, possibly a demonstration. And not only that, it sends the coordinates of where the van was when they sent the notification. Sorry, that was really cool. Did it really save $500,000 a year? It did. Very quickly, $50,000 a relief driver, and we have estimated that we have saved about 2 drivers per depot in order to keep our costs down. So we have expanded and actually kept our cost base probably where it was when we only had two to three depots. So it saved us that, as well as in Australia there's a rebate where if you're idling on private property and you're utilising the fuel, you actually get money back. That actually saved us another $140,000. And on dozens of occasions, it's actually got us to our customers where otherwise we would have actually had no service, which is just like, that's one of our core values. You cannot not go out. After that, we went mobile. We've got a cashier app on iPad Pro. We do our cash reconciliation. I've stolen the Geist Kanban. Well, actually, I paid them money, but that is used in a situation where we want to optimize our routes so we can drag our stops across lanes. That dropped the execution of our route optimization from 1.5 hours to 15 seconds. We have iPad apps in our cash room, which indicates when the vans have completed their day. And probably about a month ago, CEO said, surprise, I need something else integrated. By the end of a weekend, we had this integrated with a third-party point of sale. We were operating unattended sales. We also integrate to Kronos, ShelfX. I'm not sure if anyone's heard of ShelfX. It's a small automated fridge. Again, it's an independent point of sale. QuickBooks, We've now implemented Apex charts via JavaScript. Touched on the API for fuel rebates. We are taking all our apps offline now because of the flaky internet in Australia. It's fun. We've got employment and onboarding apps. Our bank reconciliation is done with FileMaker. Again, it's all bespoke because there isn't any other business like this that we've ever come across. Thank you. Hopefully that made sense. Any questions? Yep. That was on the iPhone. Yeah. So that iPhone will send to Android and iOS because it's just accessing the Firebase Google API. What are the ringing instructions, the honking, tooting instructions? Sometimes there's very specific instructions about what to do when you arrive on site. So it might be toot at the roundabout, but they're the sorts of things we're actually trying to retire by using the notification API, because some people get annoyed by it.
So when you want to update all are you still using the FileMaker Go app itself, or are you doing like an SDK and custom apps?
That's still FileMaker Go. So we actually stole the DevCon to Go update methodology, where it basically downloads a copy of itself, exports it, runs another updater app, and then renames it and deletes the other one. All stolen. I mean, borrowed. Cool, thank you. Yep. Yeah.